This comparative study focuses on the topic of film horror and how it is influenced by the conventions of a psychological thriller. The cinematic techniques highlight the social issues in the narrative of The Others, a horror film directed by Alejandro Amenabar, and The Orphanage, a psychological thriller directed by Juan Antonio Bayona. I will be analyzing the characterization in both films, considering their respective socio-cultural contexts, and examine the role of sound, mise-en-scène, and lighting in the conveyance of suspense and fear. The conventions of a psychological thriller and the horror genre include, but are not limited to, mise-en-scène, lighting, and sound. The Others is set in Jersey in the year 1945 at the end of World War II. The film follows a very religious mother, Grace, and her two children, Anne and Nicholas. The Others was a pivotal moment for the horror genre as Alejandro Amenabar abandoned traditional horror cliches and built up suspense instead. As a result, he was more focused on the build-up to the plot twist rather than the plot twist itself. The director riddled the film with metaphorical clues that led audiences down a breadcrumb-laden trail.
Oh, why not?
It tastes funny. I liked it better before.
The lighting was a major metaphor for ignorance. For instance, both the audience and the characters are intentionally left unaware of the death of the characters until the end of the film. The film is considered to be influenced by German Expressionism, and like many expressionistic films of the later stages of that era in the German film history, the Expressionism in The Others lacks exaggeration but is still nonetheless very expressionistic. This is expressed by the lighting, as it is provided solely from candlelight.
For what?
Their condition. The children have a very serious allergy to light. They are photosensitive and they must never be exposed to any light much stronger than this.
The loss of the father figure shaped a vast majority of the events in the film. When the father chose to fight in the war, he left his family behind. This abandonment is a source of much unstated grief and reproach. As with many aspects of the film, it was revealed that this was the reason behind that day, a day that is frequently referenced by the children but is never explained until the end.
What do you mean, Anne? What happened?
Mummy went mad.
The film introduces the conventions of a psychological thriller through the mise-en-scène and lighting represented in regard to the film's socio-cultural context. The Orphanage is set in modern-day Spain, where a woman named Laura, her husband Carlos, and their adopted son Simon move into their new home, in which Laura spent the first few of their life in. Untested Juan Antonio Bayona produced a film that deviates from the traditional horror film genre by focusing more on the journey rather than its end. This is demonstrated by the prevalence of the theme of games throughout the film, especially when she tirelessly tries to find her son. Essentially, the game itself is emphasized to create suspense for what is to come. The film feeds off of the fear of the unknown. Costumes are imperative to this. For instance, the mask that Victor wears establishes a sense of fear as it obstructs the audience's view of his face. This, coupled with our fear of creepy children, deepens the feeling of uneasiness in the audience. The film includes many characters, themes, and plots that conform to the stereotypes of traditional psychological thrillers. The film uses low-key lighting, specifically in night shots and when Laura finds Simon's body. Although similar, the narratives deviate from traditional horror genre by focusing on the development of suspense via lack of knowledge rather than the old-fashioned jump scares. Within the first 10 minutes of The Others, the audience is introduced to all of the main characters. Similar to the rest of the film, this is written with clues alluding to the end of the film. However, the audience is too distracted with the introduction of the characters to notice them. These subtle yet significant clues are presented through various events throughout the film that alone are seen as random. However, they accumulate to demonstrate a cause and effect type understanding of what transpired.
They're not asleep, ma'am. They're dead.
In a similar way, the audience is oblivious to these subtle clues presented in The Orphanage as they become acquainted with the characters. Through a series of flashbacks of these seemingly random occurrences, Laura and the audience learn what actually happened to her son. Essentially, it is because of these flashbacks that the audience is able to make the connection between her actions and Simon's death. Although the others in The Orphanage are similar, when discussing their utilization of conventions to convey the horror genre, there are some differences. Flashbacks are used to express what happened, essentially to make connections with past events and new information. In the orphanage, Laura has flashbacks of random events that occurred whilst searching for her son. It was through these flashbacks and the presence of new information that the nature of her son's disappearance was revealed. Essentially, the audience discovered this in the same way. This contrasts with the others, as they are essentially told that they are dead and have been the entire time. Although the signs of this conclusion are hinted at throughout the film, the audience never made the connection until explicitly told. In the others, the audience sees the world from the perspective of the dead. The director waits to reveal this information until the end, and, as a result, the audience experiences the feeling of normality. This shows the separation of two worlds. This separation in locations paired with the merging of the two worlds that is experienced in the film conveys the horror aspect. Contrastly, the orphanage is shown in a more realistic way, as the audience sees the world of the living as opposed to the world of the dead. Although the perspective shifts briefly, the majority of the film is shown from the perspective of the world of the living. It is worth noting that it is only when the two worlds merge that the audience experiences this alternative perspective. Elements of German expressionism in the film's socio-cultural context influence the film's horror genre as it highlights the utilization of various aspects of the conventions of a psychological thriller through modern cinematic techniques. The overwhelming feeling of isolation that envelops the audience while watching either film is a consequence of the lighting. In the others, low-key lighting is present as a result of the children's sensitivity to the light. Thus, the majority of the film consists of light produced from candles. However, due to the children's illness, the director is also able to use natural lighting to intensify the feeling of suspense in some scenes. Essentially, both kinds of lighting can be used for the creation of fear due to characterization. The orphanage's utilization of low-key lighting mimics that of the others, as it aids in the emphasis of other cinematic elements used to convey the horror genre. The seclusion is emphasized by the film's physical setting, a relatively large Victorian-style mansion. As a result, the development of feeling of isolation of the mise-en-scène conveys the horror aspects of the film. Likewise, the orphanage embodies the same profound sense of isolation that is conveyed through the characters. The loneliness that Simon feels as a young boy in a house with no other children is the result of the physical setting. Both films use children to create fear in the audience. In the others, Anne frequently describes seeing a boy named Victor. At first, the film portrays Victor as a ghost that is haunting their home. However, the audience learns this is not the case as the film develops. Essentially, Victor is used to induce fear in the audience.
Is that how she killed you? With a pillow?
Similarly, the orphanage introduces a little boy named Thomas as one of Simon's imaginary friends. As the audience already knows the genre of the film, the introduction of an imaginary child is very unsettling. The director plays off of our irrational fear of children. It is said that we are afraid of their vulnerability, which is our vulnerability, and the mysterious otherness of their private mental worlds. Essentially, it relates to our fear of the unknown, which is prevalent throughout the film. In the others, the focus is more on the build-up to the plot twist. As such, both diegetic and non-diegetic sounds are used throughout the film in order to create an uneasy feeling in the audience. The diegetic sounds emphasize the emptiness and loneliness in the home. This, in return, intensifies the feeling of suspense and fear. The non-diegetic sounds are interspersed throughout the film and are used during the action scenes to induce fear in the audience. This is also seen in the orphanage. Diegetic and non-diegetic sounds are used to establish a sense of eeriness in certain scenes to intensify the feeling of suspense, particularly the scenes where she is forced to play a children's game and say 1, 2, 3, knock on the door, uses both. It is crucial, especially at this point in the film, as it leads to the plot twist. Due to the fact that the director puts emphasis on the build-up to the plot twist, using the different cinematic elements, especially sound, to accomplish this is essential. Ultimately, the conventions of a psychological thriller and the horror genre had a major influence on the conveyance of meaning in the film, as both the others and the orphanage clearly convey the horror aspect through the utilization of various cinematic elements such as lighting, mise-en-scène, and sound, as well as the representation of the socio-cultural context.